Tonight, sorry for that. And sorry for the late start. We had a little bit of technical difficulties there. I have my guests ready. Keep sharing the link. Everybody gets into. You guys are doing that. Good night, Deborah. Good night, Deborah Lynch. Good night, Chevon McDonald. Blessings to you too, Michael George. Good night, Deborah. You're in Brooklyn. Welcome. Welcome to the program. Virginia, welcome. So you guys text me, let me know where you're watching from. Share the link. Everybody get into all of your social media groups, all your social media platforms. Share the link. Let's build a big audience. You guys are doing that. Wow. Straight to 3,000. Okay. Let's share the link. Let's get about 20,000 people watching tonight. Share the link, everybody. Share the link and let me greet some of you. Brenda Casey, Sister Casey, good night. Hope all is well with you. So I'm supposed to have three guests tonight. Amanza Walton Desir, Member of Parliament, Cathy Hughes, who's here, and Attorney at Law and Rear Admiral, former Chief of Staff of the Guyana Defense Forces here. Amanza, unfortunately, has blackout, thanks to GPL. So as soon as she gets back power, she's going to join us. But everybody keep sharing the link. And I'll be back in 60 seconds and we'll get started. Topic tonight, Venezuela and Guyana's national security. Share the link. I'll be back. good night. Welcome to Conversation with Rick Burke. Keep sharing the link, everybody. So, as you know, we have this ongoing situation with Venezuela, and the Venezuelan government and military have been what we call saber rattling. And so, Venezuela plans to have a referendum. I think is on December 3rd, where they'll ask the people of Venezuela to vote to basically annex Essequibo from Guyana. They're asking the people of vote, I think question 3 in this referendum that they have is whether or not the people of Venezuela believe that the Venezuelan government should make Essequibo part of Venezuela and create a Venezuelan map to include Guyana or Essequibo. Let me repeat that, and to create a Venezuelan map that includes Essequibo. They already have done that, right? They have their map showing that Essequibo belongs to them, and to make Essequibians, including myself, I was born in Bartica, Venezuelans, and give them ID cards. And they claim that some Geneva agreement gives them the power to do that, which is nonsense. So that's where we are in terms of this controversy. And so today, the president met with the opposition leader of Guyana, and they issued a joint statement, basically saying that they affirm that every square inch of Guyana belongs to them, and give a brief history of this controversy. A few years ago, I wrote on the history of this controversy, and for our young people in Guyana, we have to educate our young population. A few of you wrote me today. Keep sharing a link, everybody. Get into all your Guyanese groups, get on all your platforms, X or Twitter, IG, Facebook, email, Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp. Just share the link so we could get a wide audience here so we could discuss this very important matter with some very important people. And like I said, a few of you wrote me asking me, what is this controversy about? All they know is that, Venezuela says Essequibo is theirs. And by the way, Essequibo is two-thirds of Guyana, right? So they try to take away the whole country. So in order to understand this, this border controversy, we must first understand the historic nature of the controversy. Guyana has no border dispute, right? That's Guyana's position. We don't have a border dispute with Venezuela. All 83,000 square miles, including our continental shelf and our exclusive economic zone, belong to Guyana. For centuries, Venezuela has made this frivolous claim that Essequibo, rich with natural resources, including diamond, magnesium, precious stones, water, a lot of water, belong to Venezuela. Venezuela commenced this dispute only after these discoveries. And then after it was discovered that Guyana has oil, they renewed this frivolous claim. So let me give you a little context in terms of the boundary, controversy and claim by Venezuela, baseless claim by Venezuela, has come down from generations, for centuries. I'm not going to start. In 1814, the United Kingdom, which is British, acquired Essequibo, Demerara, and Berbice from the Dutch through the execution of the Anglo-Dutch Treaty. At the time, neighboring territory was Grand Colombia, which included modern-day Panama, Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, and parts of Brazil and Peru. There were no clear western boundaries. This led the British to assist British surveyor Robert Schomburg to investigate and demarcate the boundaries. The findings were accepted by the British, and the demarcations became the recognized boundary and was established as this Schomburg line. Venezuela in 1811, Venezuela was established in 1811. Sometime within a decade of its government began making claims to Essequibo. The British dismissed these claims, stating at the time that it acquired the territories Berbice, Essequibo, and so on from the Netherlands. And there were no objections to the boundaries by Spain or Grand Colombia. Remember, Venezuela was once Grand Colombia. In 1844, the British government offered Venezuela to relinquish um, control of the estuary of Orinoco River, the river mouth, sorry, and adjacent land. This was rejected. The two governments then agreed not to colonize the disputed area. In October of 1877, Venezuela cut diplomatic ties with the United Kingdom. In 1890, Venezuela published the first map showing that Venezuela was part of theirs, so they included Venezuela, Essequibo was part of their territory. The Venezuelan government hired lobbyists, William Shrub, to persuade then U.S. President Grover Cleveland to invoke the Monroe Doctrine as a utility for a resolution of this so-called controversy. The Monroe Doctrine was the brainchild of U.S. President James Monroe in 1823. It was basically it basically says that European nations can seize and colonize territories in the Western Hemisphere and say this theirs, basically. U.S. Secretary of State Richard Otley wrote to the British Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary, insisting that the UK and Venezuela agree to an arbitration to resolve the dispute Venezuela claiming Essequibo. Both countries agreed to proceed to the arbitration, and most importantly, signed an arbitration treaty in February of 1897 in Washington, D.C. to establish the International Tribunal. On October 3rd, 1899, the tribunal handed down a mixed ruling in Paris, France. While it awarded some of the territory to British Guyana, while it awarded some of British Guyana's territory to Venezuela, the ruling was largely favorable to British Guyana. The tribunal unanimously upheld the Schomburg Line, which had previously been demarcated as the border between British Guyana and Venezuela. The variations of the Schomburg Line awarded the Orinoco and Wenamau rivers to Venezuela. Both countries ratified the ruling of the tribunal as it was awarded, although Venezuela said it was unhappy with the ruling. Throughout the 1950s, Venezuela cultivated its citizens to accept the false notion that Essequibo belongs to them. In 1962, Venezuela denounced the 1899 Tribunal Award, which is the Paris Agreement, at the session of the United Nations General Assembly, contended that the tribunal to which it had agreed had no jurisdiction to make to make the ruling. In 1966, British Guyana, United Kingdom, British Guyana, the United Kingdom, and Venezuela entered an agreement in Geneva, Switzerland, to examine Venezuela's claim. Guyana stated that the award was final, as was agreed to, which is the Paris Agreement, but they only agreed to this to resolve Venezuela's assertions. On May 26, 1966, Guyana gained independence from the British, and the claim was transferred to Guyana. 5 months thereafter, in October 1966, Venezuelan military took over the Ancoko Island, Guyana's territory, and immediately commenced building an airstrip and other facilities. In October 1966, then Prime Minister Forbes Burnham sent a protest letter to Venezuela demanding its immediate withdrawal from the Ancoko Island. In an address in the Parliament on October 2nd, 2020, President David Granger warned that the Venezuelan National Army seized Ancoko Island in the Guyana River in October 1966, when Guyana gained independence, and he said they have been using it as a military garrison to harass Guyana's miners and the Guyana Defense Force. After the 1968 general elections, Venezuela sponsored a Rupulini uprising. You guys, if you know Guyana's history, you know about that. The Geneva Agreement failed to achieve the objective, which is the agreement that Forbes Burnham's government signed, which said that this is not to resolve the dispute, but it's just to resolve Venezuela's assertions. So it was exploratory. Exploratory. Um, so the Guyana government laid, sorry, let me go back a little. I want you guys to get a full understanding of this. The Geneva Agreement Commission failed to achieve its objective to resolve the outstanding issues arising from the 1899 Paris arbitration. And its period expired. Consequently, in 1970, LFS Barnum, Guyana's then president, and Venezuelan President Rafael Caldera signed a Port of Spain agreement, which declared a 12-year moratorium on the issue. During the cooling off period, Venezuela was busy teaching its population that Escobie belongs to them. The Port of Spain agreement expired in 1983 and was not extended. Venezuela then president did not pursue the claim. During this period, the Secretary General continued to pursue a resolution through his good offices as part of the framework of the 1966 Geneva Agreement. During this period, President Bonham died. Guyana was then governed by Hugh Desmond Hoyt, who worked with then Venezuelan President Jaime Lucinchi to improve relations. And now this is a very interesting period of our history. After 1992, everybody knew the government changed. Dr. Chetty Jagan became president. He died, and in July 19, and his wife took over the government after a period of time. So when Jagan died, Sam Hines became president, and then Janet Jagan claims that she won the elections. Those elections were vitiated or nullified by the courts. So she was a fake president. So in July 1998, Janet Jagan visited Venezuela. And history shows that that was a mistake. She signed an agreement with Venezuelan President Rafael Caldera, who proposed an ecological cooperation agreement between the two countries. And basically what the agreement said is that the two countries agree that they will consult each other on mining, logging operations in Essequibo. Mr. Jagan claimed the agreement did not affect a resolution of the border claim, not sure how. So after Mrs. Jagan left, you had Hugo Chavez, the president of Venezuela, who came to power in 1992. He sought to improve relations. In November 2007, Venezuela soldiers made an incursion into Guyana's territory in the Caribbean River. They blew up two unmanned gold mining dredges. That's on the bar Jagdale. And so this basically, I don't want to go through it, but this is the history of this claim. And everyone knows that when President Granger was in power, he decided to take the matter for a final settlement to the International Court of Justice, which is the ICJ. And that's where it is right now. Venezuela objected, saying that the court did not have jurisdiction. The court recently ruled that it has jurisdiction, and now the court is considering this substantive matter of the claim. So I just wanted to give you guys that for young people. Everybody keep sharing the link. And now let me introduce Attorney at Law and former Chief of Staff of the Guyana Defense Force, retired Rear Admiral Gary Best. Sir, good night.
Good night, Rickford, and good night to the viewers. Thanks for having me on your program.
Thank you. And Cathy Hughes, everybody knows Cathy. She's the chairman of the AFC. Good night, Cathy. Oh, where did you go?
I'm here now. You got me back there.
Okay, good. All right. So I tried there to give a brief history because like 4 of our young people write me and ask me like, where is this thing coming from? And so today, Cathy, I'm not sure if you were part of that meeting, but today the opposition and the government met to discuss this issue. Were you briefed on the meeting?
We were briefed after. I wasn't in the actual meeting, but yes, we were briefed on what took place.
And how did the meeting go?
Well, from the reports I have received, it was a very cordial meeting. I think it's important to just reiterate that the combined opposition has, always stood in support of the government's position on this border controversy. We acknowledge that all of Guyana belongs to us, and therefore we have always been willing and supportive. And it's one area, thankfully, that historically, I think even going back to previous governments, we've always operated, one people, one nation, one destiny. So that's good.
Could you repeat that for me? What was that?
One people, one nation, one destiny.
That's important. That's important because I see people are trying to change the national model. So I'm happy that we came right back to that and that you repeated it. Before I switch to the Rear Admiral and former Chief of Staff of the Guyana Defense Force. He's not here in that capacity, but he's a lawyer who's studied international law, and we look at it from that perspective. But as a politician, as he's a politician too, because he's an executive member of the PNC. But as the active politician here, member of Parliament, Cathy, let me ask you this: how does the AFC view the saber rattling by Venezuela and this referendum that they plan to pose to their population on December 3rd, which they think that the population is probably going to approve and give them a pretext to probably try to occupy part of Essequibo?
We have found it very, very disturbing. And again, I mean, I could speak for the AFC, but I think I can also share, and of course, Gary would be able to confirm. I think both the APNU and the AFC are concerned, as all Guyanese should be very, very concerned.
Venezuela has an election coming up, and there's this. I think the new opposition leader, a female. I actually forgot her name. Is it Karina? I think Karina is her name. She's proven to be a very formidable opponent of Maduro.
Yeah.
Nicolas Maduro, the current president. And I think he's making some of these moves because of her. But I think they've also banned her from participating in the election, being a candidate. So do you think that this aggression from Venezuela is because of the political straits that Maduro has found himself in, or do you think that they intend to occupy Essequibo?
Well, I think it is worrying because of what has taken place. And if, the question is, having made the decision, over the last, from 2015, we've seen various things that have been passed in the Venezuelan parliament. We've been seeing various indications, discussions, protocols from the parliament. And when you get to this stage and you're actually going to have a referendum with those questions, we know that more than likely the Venezuelan people are going to be supportive. And the problem is that you can't pull those actions back. So there's naturally going to be, I don't see how the Venezuelan government would not be able to walk through the process that it has set up currently. In given all that they've said, all that they've done, and the pending referendum on December 3rd, there's an obvious direction that they're heading in. And I don't see them all of a sudden saying, oh, no, we shouldn't have done this. We want to be a good neighbor.
It's a mandate. They're trying to seek a mandate.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a mandate. Now, here goes a $5 billion question. I mean, it popped up right, and I'm going to ask you it. Somebody's asking here, ask Cathy how she feels that the government is now calling for the opposition to work with it on this issue when the government has previously refused to work with the opposition. There you go.
It's a difficult situation, but I am very proud of the fact that I like to say that we're the bigger people, we're the bigger person. And in the interest of Guyana and our territorial sovereignty, I don't think that this is the time to put aside, we have to put aside the differences that we've had. It's absolutely clear. I think later in the discussion, we can get into some of the concerns that we have. Whether we like it or not, we have to be concerned that over the last, 4 or 5 years, you can see there's a visible increase in the presence of Venezuelans in our communities. We see them working in the stores. There have been discussions as to suggestions that it's as high as 100,000 Venezuelans. I mean, the problem is too, where are these persons? What is the system that's tracking where they are, who they are, what they're doing? The reality is, can we wake up one day and realize we've got 100,000 Venezuelans living in Bartica, where you originally come from, or in the Essequibo region? So it's a threat to our national security. And I know that Gary is supremely qualified to speak on national security issues other than me. But it's worrying because we have to see it in the holistic view. Have we, in the name of getting, has the PPP, in the name of registering Venezuelans as Guyanese, handing out birth certificates? And I could say that because last Saturday, the AFC had its national conference, and that's where all the regional reps sit down and meet. And we put out a statement because we had concerns from about 4 very strategic regions where there were reports of of Venezuelans being given birth certificates. This has come up in the press. Not once have I seen the government outline very carefully the protections they have put in place to ensure that, only one of Guyanese parentage or the requirements that our constitution provides are being registered. So we don't know. We don't know.
Mr. Best, two questions. Is this Venezuelan referendum a violation of international law because it seeks to annex another country? And two, are you concerned that the Venezuelans who are in the country cannot be tracked? We don't know how many of them they are. I understand from a government minister who told me they're in excess of 22,000 in Region 1. I saw that the official population of Region 1, according to Stats Bureau, is 24,000. So they have equaled us in Region 1. That seems to be an invasion by citizens. What is your concern about national security there? And does this referendum violate international law?
I believe the referendum itself is a violation of international law because I don't think you can decide in one state to hold a referendum concerning the affairs and territory of another state. Essequibo is a sovereign part of sovereign Guyana. That's the first thing I want to say. So yes, it's a violation of international law. Secondly, the issue of the Geneva Agreement has nothing to do with what Venezuela is purporting to have in the referendum. Geneva Agreement really was a cooling off period. If one studies the Geneva Agreement carefully and the literature surrounding it, to the extent that it means or suggested or it was meant to have an outcome that was peaceful, political, diplomatic. If you look at all those words, the only outcome that could have come from the Geneva Agreement was that Venezuela will finally accept the 1899 arbitration award. At no point in time, the Geneva Agreement and process ever meant for the border, the whole discussions in the border to be reopened. So transitioning now to the ICJ was a natural step from the Geneva Agreement. And again, the case before the ICJ, as I understand it, and I think as is the understanding, is really to reaffirm the sanctity of the 1899 arbitral award. Mm-hmm. So to that extent, Venezuela is playing a dangerous international game by creating a fiction that the Geneva Agreement had something to do with what they're currently doing. So yes, it's a violation of international law. It's underhand activities. It's not proper diplomatic speak by Venezuela. And I dare say it will be difficult for them to have sufficient international or any international friends, so to speak. or unless there's as variant as Venezuela to deal with this issue. It also brings into sharp contrast what is happening here, and I'm going regional with CARICOM, how Venezuela is utilizing its financial and resource power to have small states host activities for them. Let us look at what happened recently in Barbados, where this is a CARICOM nation, and Barbados hosted a discussion between the combined opposition, as I understand it, and the Venezuelan government. For over the next 6 months, Venezuela will conduct itself in such a manner, meaning have electoral reform, so an elections can be held that is considered free and fair. Uh, not the, I'm saying this because Barbados is a CARICOM nation.
Mm-hmm.
And Barbados has looked at its national interests, not CARICOM interests, its
Mhm.
national interests when it made that decision to host that conference. So Guyana has to look at its national interests,
Yeah.
put its national interests first. At every step of the way, national laws will trump international law. We have a duty and responsibility to ensure that the national laws of this country keep Guyana safe. The national laws of this country must enable that every Guyanese enjoy the benefit of this country. So while there's an international aspect to this spurious claim by Venezuela, the government of Guyana must understand its duty and responsibility to its nationals. It has to push national interest first, because that's exactly what Barbados did. Now, coming to the issue of Venezuelans in Guyana, I spoke on this issue before, on the issue, and I had mentioned the possibility of annexation a la Crimea in Guyana. Now, there are certain things that we should mention and we should be concerned with as Guyanese. The Venezuelans who are in Guyana have been taught and educated that Essequibo is part of their country.
Mm-hmm.
That is very, very significant. There's no Venezuelan in Guyana today who is not aware and had to write an exam in school to pass that exam that says Guyana Essequibo is part of their country. And these are the persons to whom Guyana has offered
Mhm.
assistance. These are the persons to whom Guyana has offered assistance. So that is critical. Now, those with familial ties, anyone would agree if you have familial ties, yes, that's not an issue. But those with non-familial ties, the economic migrants and the refugees, whom we don't know, whom we cannot track, to whom the government cannot give accountability, that really creates the problem for Guyana. So I,
Do you
I,
think that's a reckless? Do you think that's a reckless policy from by the government to accept all of these people
I think
without
I,
knowing
I
who they
believe
are?
I believe it is a reckless policy, and I would say it seems to me as though the government is playing politics with our border issue. And I
Mhm.
say this, I know it's a very strong statement I'm making, but when I look at the facts, it appears as though we're playing politics with the border issue. Because when I look at the evolution of the economic migrants and the refugees, when they would arrive in Guyana and have quick clearance by immigration officials without going into any particular center for any detention center. The refugees go into refugee camps. Economic migrants, right? Economic migrants, you have to check them out. If they're economic migrants coming into the country, you have to know who they are. You have to run background checks to ensure. And if you're going to incorporate them into society, to what extent? There's no international treaty or convention that would allow any nation to overrun its population. So to that extent, it has to be considered reckless if we're not going to look at the numbers and determine to what extent migrants or refugees will come to our country and have to tap into the resources that are so limited for Guyanese.
Mhm.
And at the same time, expand these resources for them, our health sector, our production sector, our food sector, with spiraling inflation, all these cost prices going up. It has to do with the number of persons coming into the country. So to that extent, I think it's reckless. To that extent, I don't think the government has misstepped significantly here. And there will be all kinds of accusations on the government. And it is not unfair for anyone to suggest that there's significant politics being played by the government with the border. And we cannot afford to have a government that does that. We cannot afford to have a government that does that. The other thing I want to mention before I go on this issue, I mean, the history gave us a pretty good history. However, just a few nuggets. Venezuela acknowledged that Essequibo was not part of its country prior to its independence. And that's significant. It's after Venezuela became independent, it went after the Essequibo region. And everything they said, they knew that Essequibo was not part of
Yeah.
Venezuela. It's after its independence And as Guyana was about to gain independence in 1966, this issue became ripe. And to an extent, the British also landed us into this issue because they created this Geneva Agreement. Forbes Barnum signed the Geneva Agreement under significant duress because they were creating an opportunity. Britain was taking pressure off itself from Venezuela and the Americans at the time. Within the geopolitical sphere of Guyana, coming out from the PVP government that was considered leftist, and therefore Forbes Bond would not become left and go to become a communist as Chedi, and therefore they had a lot of geopolitical games, and Britain left us in this mess. But the second thing I want to mention, which is important, is that Guyana inherited these borders, and these borders that we have today are sacrosanct. They are in our constitution. So we did not create this situation. Even though there's successes entitled in international law, what we succeeded or what we received from the British are exactly the same borders that we operated in within today. So I believe we have a very solid case before the ICJ to reaffirm the sanctity of the borders. And secondly, or finally on this particular point, only a national referendum in Guyana can change our borders. And Guyanese must understand only a national referendum can change our borders. No president, no cabinet, no government can change the borders of this country. If you read Article 2 of the Guyana Constitution, it is embedded. It requires a referendum to change it. So we cannot play politics with our borders because the Constitution does not allow us to play any politics with our borders. I'll pause now.
And also, when Venezuela settled the final border with Brazil, that whole map showed Esquivel as part of Guyana.
They tried jumping.
So they knew they knew that Esquivel doesn't belong to them. Now, let me ask a very political question of both of you. The government is willingly, recklessly allowing Venezuelans to come to Guyana without limit. I'm hearing numbers of up to at least 100,000. That's a significant alteration of our population or an expansion of our population. Venezuela is an enemy of our country, but CARICOM has Haiti, which is in crisis, has a lot of refugees scattering all around the world. Guyana has 83,000 square miles, only 18% of the country is occupied, but the government is sending back Haitians. They've now imposed a ban on Haitians and a visa requirement, which is against the revised Treaty of Chagaram, which established CARICOM. Is that discrimination against the Haitians? Cathy, you first.
I think it absolutely is. And it leads us to the question as to whether we do have a national migration policy, because that's how the government, we should have one, and it should outline clearly some kind of fair approach. What are the guidelines on which we are willing to accept persons to come to our country? We know that there are times of crisis. They may come for a short period of time. Is there a process by which they're then relocated? Because, as you quite rightly said, there's a very clear distinction. And we saw this 2 years ago when the Haitians were coming through. Here's a member of CARICOM, and they were treated in the most disrespectful manner. And yet you have another nationality coming in without a problem. We even changed the wording on our police cars to make sure that they're comfortable. And we're ensuring that our elections office is learning Spanish. I mean, these are the things that we've seen in the press recently that have not been disputed as being false. So we can only assume that yes, the president wants GCOM to be able to speak Spanish. And of course, we know the saga with the police cars. What is the policy that allows Venezuelans to come and Haitians can't come without the visas and a whole rigmarole?
Mr. Best,
Yeah,
same
well,
question.
I think without much thinking on the particular issue of the Haitians, it is clear that it is discrimination.
Mhm.
The Haitians were discriminated against. It was a sad, and it's a sad moment for us in our country's history, that this is a CARICOM state, a CARICOM nation, the country that was the first
Africa.
black republic outside of Europe.
Mhm.
Toussaint Louverture, the late great Toussaint Louverture, loaned ships to Simon Bolivar for him to fight the Spanish. And I look at Venezuela today and I ask myself the questions if they've forgotten their history, right? And even if it wasn't Toussaint himself and his successor generals, Haiti loaned ships to the Venezuelan Simon Bolivar, who was the liberator, to liberate the Venezuelans from the Spanish. And today we live and we see Venezuela not honoring the Bolivar name in their country. So yes, it was discrimination against the Haitians of the most vicious order, because Haiti created an opportunity for us to think about freedom. And let me go back a bit and say that the 1763 revolution in Guyana by the late great Kofi also created an opportunity for the Haitians and inspired them for their revolution. So we are attacking all these great historical moments where we make these decisions of the government. So it was discrimination of a maybe perhaps a savage nature. And I'm thinking that right now the government would have regretted that decision. Now when we come to the Venezuelans, and why it becomes obvious, patent, that people want to think that this is politics you're playing, and this is what you're doing, and it's backfiring at the moment, because as I mentioned, these Venezuelans that are here, outside of those with familiar ties, have been educated at Essequibo's part of their country. And if you
Mhm.
look at the Venezuelans, and if you were to see them as persons in the national security sector, would be able to recognize who might be soldiers, who might be commandos, who might be special.
Intelligence agents.
There's a certain gait that they would have. If we were to see them, if we were to have them see them somewhere, we don't know where they are, and we don't know if there's a labor force for this infrastructure build out that the government talks about so often. We created employment for others and not for ourselves. So yes, I have to agree um, that this really was discrimination to the extent that this is where we are in Guyana. And let me go on to say that it is time for the government to put a cap on the economic migrants and refugees. That's the first, and we cap it, and then we painstakingly go through and find out where the Venezuelans are, who are they, who are not familiar, and then investigate those persons to determine if they're truly economic migrants or refugees.
Mhm.
Because
Mhm.
in my opinion, even though I saw the joint statement, it didn't give much details as to what will be the national response. But
Yeah.
part of the national response ought to be one, a cap on migrants coming to Guyana. It would be it would be almost ludicrous if tomorrow we hear another two Venezuelan boats arrive with Venezuelans in this country,
Mhm.
based on what is happening right now. So one of the statements that should have been made by the leaders, the national leaders of this country, is that as of now, no more Venezuelans will be coming into Guyana.
Exactly.
That
Yeah.
should be that should be a clear statement that should have come out by now. I haven't heard that statement.
Yeah.
And second, we have to put a cap on it, and then we have to separate those with familial ties, and then we have to look and find out where these refugees are and these migrants, and then do the painstaking investigation. And if, to the extent to which they're not migrants, economic migrants, or refugees, then we have to send them back to Venezuela. And let me make this point also, which I think is important. We are, as a nation right now, we are subsidizing the economic mismanagement of Venezuela by Maduro. That's what we're doing.
Yeah.
While we subsidizing his economic management of his country,
Our people are
at
suffering.
the same time, he is want to hold a referendum to
Yeah.
annex people from Guyana.
Yep.
In Guyana we call it, it's badai.
Yes.
We are
It-
subsidizing. We are allowing Venezuelans to come here in
yeah.
numbers, uncontrolled numbers. And at the same time, this gentleman is planning to annex Guyana.
Mhm. So
Who
we
has
so
to do
we don't
that?
get we don't get a thank you for putting them into our education system, our health system, and all these other areas. I mean, the when you talk about bad eye and slap in the face, and I want to just I
But
went
Kathy,
to
don't you
my
think? But don't
phone
you think
just
that's the
to
strategy?
double check, because the other thing that I found interesting today,
Don't you think that's the
I do,
strategy?
and that's why it's so worrying and so dangerous, because today also I do. And today in the press, there's a report, the headline: one of three Venezuelans pleads guilty to illegal possession of guns, ammunition, and drug charges. So that really takes us back to the question: who are these people that are coming?
Um,
And where
recently,
are they?
recently, the government told a U.S. official, I'm told, I'm advised, I wasn't there, that the Venezuelans that they have accepted in the country are Guyanese. You see the plan? They want to claim these people are Guyanese.
We know that because, as I said, we've been getting reports of, birth certificates. As you may know, we actually had a change in our legislation that allowed a Tushao to vouch, so to speak, for individuals in his community. When before it was a far more rigorous process. You had to have somebody that was actually there when you were born, that would have to present an affidavit. There were about 5 or 6 different checks and balances to ensure that we were very strict with the process.
Well, will
So
the
now
AFC
we've made it
challenge that
easy.
legislation?
Sorry?
Will the AFC challenge the validity of that legislation,
Will
or the
who?
opposition? Will the opposition challenge the validity of
Well,
that
we challenged
legislation?
it when it came up in Parliament,
No,
and
in
that's
court. In court.
in court. I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't know. Hopefully, and this is a good thing to say, that there are loads of pieces of legislation we would like to challenge, but as you know, it costs money each time.
Mhm.
And
But this could be the difference between winning and losing an election. The government is now preparing the roadmap to pad the voters list
yep,
with presumed voters or supporters of theirs.
yep. But
But
you see, what's sad, Rickford, is that we've been speaking about this for the last year and a half, about this attempt to pad the voters list. And the whole registration process, and the Venezuelans in this country, the government is only dealing with it and speaking about it now because it's blown up in their face. But their intention has always been, we know that the census is going to show that a large number of East Indian Guyanese continue to migrate. We know how the numbers go. And this is their mechanism for ensuring that they're going to have more people registered that are going to be sympathetic to them, and they're
Right.
willing to throw away and to risk the sovereignty of our country for that.
Gary, let me ask you this. Do you think it was a mistake on Guyana's part to allow the Venezuelans to continue to occupy the Ancoco Island, and for Ms. Jagan to sign that um, agreement with Venezuela, with Rafael Caldera, that both countries will examine ecological investments in Essequibo? I mean, that's almost a concession of shared management of Essequibo. Were those two things two policy mistakes on behalf of Guyana?
and the first one with Coco Island, I think, I would say if on the international speak, maybe Coco Island could have been appeasement. Appeasement was not a good thing because Chamberlain tried it with
Exactly.
Hitler and lost significantly. But at the time, both of those countries had maybe parity in their resources. There was a big disparity in the resources between Guyana, just at the time of independence, and Venezuela. So I think it was considered more studious for us to leave it as it is, and as Forbes Barnum did, he raised it internationally and he protested internationally. Beyond that, we did more. We did more than that. Subsequently to that, we created a defense policy for the country, and it was called Total National Defense, and it was anchored on the concept that we call defense in depth. So what the Forbes Barnum government did, notwithstanding the Ancoco Island, was to expand the defense posture of the country. The thinking and the actions and the thinking were, one, we'll have a small defense force, a regular force, and a large reserve. So within the 10 regions of the country, we had a lot of reserves. And the reserves were persons who had the normal jobs and would then be part of the reserve, similar to what Israel has done.
Israel, yeah.
We had reserves in Northwest, in the region one, all the different regions. that system went out of place post 1992. So we had eyes and ears on the ground.
Yeah.
So while we would not spend our limited resources to create a very large defense force and therefore put our people in misery while we try to maintain military armament, we had these results out there. And then we had a viable diplomatic and international action. Defense diplomacy was our first line of defense. The second line of defense really was the Guyana Defense Force. The third line of defense was the population of Guyana. Under the concept of total national defense, it means that all the resources in the country would go towards that defense effort. And if you look at Article, I think it's 33 of the Constitution, it is clear that it is the duty of every citizen to defend Guyana. And what sprung from that was the concept, every citizen a soldier. That was misinterpreted as though we wanted to militarize the country. What we were essentially doing is going back to the Constitution to make the point that it is the duty of every citizen to defend, whether you own only, whether you rent in a property, your own property or your own businesses, or your children will be schooled in Guyana overseas. Every citizen in Guyana is there to defend. So I wanted to mention that as part of a defense policy for the entire country that was done by the PNC administration. It lasted up until close to 1992. We had that system in place, and there are many persons available who can speak even more on it. President David Grange and others who were part of that architecture. And the second thing, whether or not what President Jagan signed, Rashley Jackson had mentioned that the government's policy at the time was one, defense diplomacy, and two, to create an environment for functional cooperation with Venezuela. So that the two countries will not fight each other, they will keep talking and speaking. And that's the extent in which we went in terms of foreign policy. That's a functional cooperation between Guyana and Venezuela. Pushing it beyond for, as you explained, for us to mutually determine and agree on exploration in Essequibo, I think went back to the appeasement, which failed with Hitler and Chamberlain. And I would say if you look at it now, in reflection, it's a mistake. But secondly to that, such a matter that concerns our borders, that concern our resources within sovereign Essequibo, at the level of the government, the president, back to cabinet, ought to have required a joint parliamentary declaration. A joint parliamentary declaration, because you're asking a third country to be involved in making determination of your natural resources in your country. And again, I go back to the Article 2 of the Guyana's Constitution, its territory. No government can change that or pretend to change that or interfere with it unless there's a national referendum. So
recklessness
together and make that decision. We didn't, and in hindsight, we're seeing the benefit of it. So Venezuela itself may be looking for less than Essequibo, but we don't know. But President Maduro has found himself in a very awkward position. He has a strange political and military calculus at the moment. And Guyana needs both international, regional, and national efforts. But I'd like to concentrate on the national efforts right now. And I repeat what I said earlier. I expected a statement that would come and say there will be an immediate cap on Venezuelan migrants and refugees coming to this country as of now, until we understand fully what
absolutely
they are. And because that will provide a sense of confidence.
Should they begin to repatriate them as well? I mean, they're pursuing aggression against the country.
Well, some countries do that. They tell all the non-nationals to leave.
Sorry, that is the awkwardness of the situation. We, at the same time, offering a economic help to Venezuela, and Venezuela is offering us guns and bullets. So it's again, I'm saying the nation is looking for leadership. The people in Essequibo would like to hear and feel confident, and the people in Damara and Borbis also. But I've seen no one has gone to Essequibo. I've seen the government in Region 6. They're not in Region 1. The president
Gary,
their supporters are not in Region 7.
No, but Gary, you know that the airstrip in Eterembang is not in a condition that it can be used.
So
can you imagine that since 2015, since 2015, we know the agenda and the path that the Venezuelan government was taking. Because as soon as we announced that we'd found oil, we remember the things that took place after in their parliaments, where they
Mhm.
changed the demarcations and started this
Yeah.
whole attempt to claim territory that doesn't belong to them. So we knew from then where they were going. You talked about a joint parliamentary agenda. Gary, the parliament doesn't even operate sufficiently. By now, in any other country, I am sure that there would have been an emergency session of
Yeah,
parliament.
we
We
called for it.
actually came back from our recess. Nothing, nothing has happened. And you know what? What is frightening is that we know that from past experience, you can have national floods, you can have funds that have been misappropriated, and now you can have this situation, and our parliament and our speaker will not provide the opportunity for national debate on something as critical as this. I think tomorrow there's going to be a meeting of the Parliamentary Committee on Foreign Affairs.
Yes, I
And
heard that.
this all goes back to the fact that most of these committees deliberately were not allowed to be formed. The speaker did not call them into operation. I am on the Natural Resources Committee. We had to scream and shout, and finally, it started about 3, 4 months ago, and we're already more than 2 years into, almost 3 years
But Cathy,
later.
Barjack, the vice president of the country, said that the parliament must not play a role in the management of the oil sector when the parliament make laws and regulation for every aspect of the country. So that's their thinking. They don't believe because it gives the opposition a mandate to participate through these sectoral committees. Why is the board and security committee meeting? And let me I have a more important question than
Sure.
that. This government is they have good relations with the US. The US placed them in power, the previous administration. The US just lifted sanctions against Venezuela, and Guyana did not object to that. The US lifted sanctions
Yeah.
against Venezuela, and Guyana did not object to that. In the meantime, Guyana, the government, is hiring lobbyists to attack Guyanese citizens in America, right? They hired a lobbyist to attack the conference we just had. They hired a, but they don't have a lobby to pressure the United States not to lift sanctions against Venezuela, which is an enemy. It is fascinating. It
Or
is
a lobby,
fascinating.
or a lobby to go to every single international conference that's taking place
Right.
and present Guyana's case
Yes.
to every Tom, Dick, and Harry, so the world is cognizant and have a clear understanding of this dispute. More and more people need to know that it was more than 60 years. I think it's 63 years we were hearing um, before this came out of the woodwork once again. It was settled.
Well,
And
the
63 years later, you can wake up and decide, oh, well, let me try a thing.
You know what?
well,
They got gold and oil now, so let me take away. Let me say that's
Yes,
ours.
yes,
that's
yes.
right.
That's it.
And Gary
Um,
made an important observation with the role of Barbados
right.
in that meeting. And at the end of the day, it is a country's individual national interest. And when you have some countries that think that they can get oil cheaper from Venezuela, and some places still have Petrocaribe, um, you have no guarantee who's going to
Well,
be
I
voting
don't understand that
in
though.
Guyana's
Guyana
favor.
has oil too. Why is the government saying to the CARICOM government, hey, listen, we will get our people to get cheap oil to you. Don't use Venezuela. Venezuela is at war with us, and therefore Venezuela should be at war with it. CARICOM should consider the whole community
But
at war with Venezuela.
But
you would
of
have to
course,
have a policy and a plan.
mhm.
And if you're
Okay.
just going day to day, anything happen, you're responding, you're not thinking down the line. As we
Gary,
said, where is the
go
migration
ahead. Sorry.
policy?
Finish off, Kathy.
Gary,
Finish off.
Gary talks about the defense policy. I mean, what exists today? in terms of a defense policy.
I so ashamed to be a Guyanese. I don't know what kind of government this is. It's a cowboy government. They don't have a
One,
strategy for anything. Now they're scrambling, calling
one,
the opposition. They don't have a proper response. They ain't called the parliament, no statement. I mean, I don't know. And this, how we got to this crisis and the population doesn't know what is happening in Venezuela. Gary.
you made a good point there, Rickford. Let me pick up on it. The point you made about we talked about Venezuela using its resource power and financial power within CARICOM to gain benefits, and we know Petrocaribe is going to come back because of the ease of sanctions against Venezuela, and and Chevron can rekindle its
Yep.
restart its wells
Yep.
and so forth.
Yep. Yep.
But what it also brings into sharp focus is the foreign policy, this country's foreign policy.
Mhm.
It seems to me now that as we step back and we do some, reverse analysis, I'm getting the impression that we didn't seem to have a good foreign policy for CARICOM as a nation state.
We got
Uh,
no policy.
for
We
Yes.
don't have
CARICOM,
a foreign policy.
for CARICOM
Gary,
as a
you're being
nation
very
state.
diplomatic.
The reason why I mentioned for CARICOM as a nation state, because CARICOM is still going and seeking hydrocarbons favor from a country that is attacking Guyana, a country that historically has waged economic warfare against Guyana, and a CARICOM state and other CARICOM states are comfortable in that arrangement. It means that we did not create an opportunity also for those CARICOM states to be comfortable and share part of what Guyana has right now. And I recall that the issue of sharing the wealth of Guyana was put down by a prominent Guyanese politician with the rest of the Caribbean. So there could be some diplomatic fallout in the way that we're treating this resource. We must not forget the time when the late Eric Williams came to the rescue of Guyana, came to the rescue of this country by providing loans upon loans upon loans
Yeah.
to Guyana to bring us out of financial crisis. And that's a Trinidadian in that case. So I think we see my question, why would a country that received where two of its prime ministers received the highest award in Guyana would turn in such short notice and host a conference with Venezuelan government and opposition in their country? And we gave them, each of the two distinguished prime ministers, the highest award. And one was also involved, ought not to be so involved in our recent elections.
Mm-hmm.
So it talks about Ghana's foreign policy for CARICOM, and I think there are issues going on there. That's why we've seen it. St. Vincent and the Grenadines, are very close also to the Petrocaribe. So and that is a gentleman who spoke a lot about our elections. So something is happening between Guyana and CARICOM that we have to sense it now by doing a reverse analysis. So I wanted to make that point. And for the opposition is part of government and part of governance according to our constitution.
Constitution.
Government cannot go it by itself. Foreign policy, when it is developed, must involve the opposition. You have to use the total national resources in this country for you to have better output. I'm not clear what is the foreign policy analysis. I'm not sure how
I
you
am.
can.
I'm very clear what it is. Guyana's foreign policy.
Liberal or a realist. I'm not sure what theory underpins the foreign policy. But
We don't have a defense policy. We don't have a foreign policy. Most of these things. We do infrastructure projects without any kind of background research or any.
Without a policy. Without a policy.
Yeah.
And a strategy. But you hear, this is the thing, right? And we said this in Washington when we met with the members of Congress that Jack, they said we didn't meet with. Everything this government does is to curb opposition. Its relationship with those prime ministers that Gary just talked about is intended to limit or attack opposition. When they go abroad, everything is to attack opposition. They came to the United States to limit the influence of the opposition. They're doing things in Guyana to make sure that the opposition doesn't get traction in terms of their political outreach, in terms of expanding their support base. Everything this government does is inward looking, is short sighted, and it's to benefit them and their supporters. That's why they're in this problem right now. They're now running, calling the president, the opposition leader for consultation. And it's only because we began to criticize them. Now, I heard that Amanza at a press conference today saying, or at a press gavel outside the office of the president saying they'll call the parliament. You have to wait until Venezuela threatens you to call the
That's what I'm
parliament?
saying. That's what I'm
How are
saying.
these people? And the people of Guyana are busy going about their daily lives. The people in Essequibo right now are probably having a heart attack.
They're
You
scared.
have two regions,
Concerned.
two regions where Venezuelans are about to outnumber Guyanese. That's already an occupation. We don't know who these people are. They could be soldiers, they could be intelligence agents, and the government of Guyana going about, we hosting this and we flying to Washington. And
Yeah,
Venezuela
one
already
export to
started
the
an invasion
next.
of the country.
Yeah.
Huh?
I
So
said
they
one
don't have a
export to
foreign
the
policy.
next.
Go ahead, Kathy.
No, I was just saying yes, one export to the next. Because
Yes.
every week we involved in some expo on something, whilst the major issues that affect our territory, we have so many
Wish it
questions
away.
that
They're
remain
just wishing it
unanswered.
away.
Yep.
They're, you know what one of the government people told me? We don't want to seem aggressive in our response because we don't want to further provoke Venezuela. Excuse me. And I was like, are you serious? You don't want to provoke Venezuela? Venezuela is coming with aggression, whether you provoke it or not. You have to respond. You have to respond.
No, we want to
So
learn
they're appeasing
Spanish.
Venezuela. Every time this party is in government, they appease Venezuela. And we're now seeing where we have a partial invasion of Essequibo already, and now Venezuela is going to the people for a mandate to send their army in to annex Essequibo from Guyana. And these set the people Barjack, they're studying how to get Rickford Burke extradited, how we could frame him, how we could call him a criminal, how we could block Cathy Hughes and David Patterson from doing something, how we could do that. Barjack, they're every day is cursing us out. He and Jose Maduro, he sees Maduro as his friend, right? But Burke is the enemy, and Cathy Hughes and Gary Bess and the PNC, and they're enemies, right? In the meantime, Maduro at the border with
Well,
guns.
but
I
Rickford,
heard, I heard that Venezuelan army seized 4 boats. I'm gonna check the exact area. 4 boats. The government didn't report nothing. I saw a army report, intelligence report that said
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Nothing. This government, this country don't know that Venezuela has pontoons transporting hardware, military equipment up and down the Cayenne River. The country doesn't know because they're just wishing it away. Go ahead, Kathy.
No, I was just going to say, as you were talking about the vice president, I mean, we got to be doing a lot of good stuff for him to be so consumed. So don't take it as it's a compliment, really, that he could have a press conference and spend an hour talking about us, as opposed to some of the major things that are happening in the country.
And
So,
Maduro at the border with his the thousands of soldiers, and he talking about Rickford Burke.
well, that's you. You ain't feeling good. You ain't feeling you bigger and better than Maduro. No, but on a serious note, I'm disappointed that first of all, we haven't seen the national discussion, certainly within the parliament, which is long overdue. And the Foreign Relations Committee should have been functioning and on this a long time ago. It's good to mention that, in fact, when Raphael Trotman, who was the previous chair of the committee, resigned from Parliament, it took, and it should automatically have gone, the chairmanship should automatically have gone at that stage to the PPP. The PPP did absolutely nothing with the committee for well over a year, which is why Amanza was within her rights, as she said the other day, you missed your turn. because for a whole year you ain't called the committee, and now we're forcing it back into the agenda, and your position is that you want to chair it. So
So
we have
every year, that's the policy. Every year, the chairmanship changes.
it rotates. It
Okay.
rotates, right? So, but as we keep saying in this conversation, this Venezuela situation and aggression didn't start 2 weeks ago
Overnight.
or 3 weeks ago. We got the biggest warning in 2015, the biggest warning. And that's why you take your hat off to David Granger for deciding, you know what? After more than 25 years of a good neighborly approach with the UN, that the UN sponsored, we had a good neighbor officer that visited, and nothing happened. That he took the APNU AFC administration under Mr. Granger, said, you know what? We can take this to the international court. And that's where we are right now.
And to add to
And
that,
What should be the strategy? It seems to me that Venezuela has realized that it will lost the case before the ICJ, and they're now taking steps to preempt the ruling. Um, Gary, as you know, you have national security experience in galore. You also have legal expertise. What should be this government's policy with regard to what Venezuela is doing now? Should we mobilize the international community to impose some sort of deterrent? What should be? How did that sit down with Bart now and them boys cuddling and say, "Oh God, we gotta move everybody from Mexico, but gotta move the house and that." Apart
mm,
from that, like, what is the policy we should pursue to deter Venezuela from coming to occupy Essequibo as they intend to do after that referendum?
well, I think that there are three levels of intervention. One is international, regional, and national. At the international level, I expect to see the foreign minister visiting all the capitals.
mm-hmm.
So
Which one of the foreign ministers? You
the,
have
the,
Barrett, Robert, and Todd.
the accredited foreign minister, the one who could
Okay.
speak on behalf of Guyana, Mr. You Todd.
Todd.
Yeah.
I expect to see the foreign minister going to the various capitals, including Havana, Cuba, to speak on
Okay.
the issue of Venezuela aggression. I think that would speak volumes. I think that's at the international front. The fact that I'm not seeing it is suggesting that the government has
Not
abandoned
done it.
defense diplomacy as a first line of defense. Because that has always been our first line of defense as a small state.
Mm-hmm.
So I expect that at the international level. The regional level is also to speak to CARICOM. We need a better statement from CARICOM and speak to individual CARICOM countries and talk to CARICOM in such a manner that they can depend on Guyana, Guyana's resources, Guyana's newfound wealth to help develop them, because we depended on CARICOM when we were in tough times.
Yeah.
When I said the capitals for the foreign minister, it includes Brazil, Colombia, and those are the more progressive countries in Latin America in relation to Guyana, so to speak. And then, of course, we have Brussels, and you should even get to Moscow, because there's strong relations between Russia and Venezuela. Beijing, there's strong relations between China
China.
and Venezuela. So
Yep.
those movement, that kind of output and outpour by the country stop diplomat will all go well for Guyana. And at the national level, as I said, we need national leadership. And we need to, at the national level, right now, make a clear statement that we're going to stop economic migrants and refugees from coming to Guyana, to imbue confidence in the people in this country. We need to have confidence. Because if we're not confident, a lot of things are going to happen. People are going to be lazy. People are going to be lethargic. Production is going to decrease, right? The whole output, the whole production output in the country will be decreased. The other
Is
thing
this also going to deter investment? Isn't that a big investment risk right now?
but that's the point I was going on to make. Venezuela has conducted economic warfare against Guyana. The cost of doing business in Guyana is very high. The cost of doing business is high.
Yeah.
If you look at the international risk assessment, it's high for Guyana. When those risk assessments are done by international agencies, if you look at interest rates to do business in Guyana, you see it's very high. If you look at the marine insurance rates again, it's very high because of the risk assessment for Guyana. So Venezuela knows exactly what it is doing. Once its saber rattles, it makes an investment. That is a crime. That's an economic crime. They're behaving like an economic hitman to Guyana. That's how Venezuela is behaving. And at the same time, we can't continue to allow Venezuela to pour into this country when its president is behaving like an economic hitman to us. We have to pause it. We have to ensure we know who are familiar ties, along
Mhm.
with those who don't have. And like I said, we have to begin to repatriate Venezuelans. And that will require, to some extent, a closure of our western border with Venezuela so that
Mhm.
we can get and sort out our national interests.
Yep.
Our national interest has to come first. And that is where we are. And those are the three levels I would say we need to deal with in terms of our response
Mhm.
to.
Before I go to closing remarks, we're like really going late. Don't you think we should have, oh, in terms of closure of the borders, shouldn't our borders be closed right now? And we have Ghana Defense Force officers stationed all across the border with Venezuela. That is
But,
not happening.
but let me say this. As a former chief of staff, there's some issues of defense that I really can't speak to publicly, right?
Okay.
Pieces of information I've been pretty good that I don't want to speak to publicly. What I can say, the Ghana Defense Force, with its current assets and capability, right, they know what they have to do and they understand that. And while you might not be as visible as you would like it to be, it is as profound as it can be given the resources they have. So you have different levels
But
of
how do
defense.
you, I understand that, but how do you imbue confidence in the population that the GDF is on top of things when there's no public awareness campaign? They're not seeing war games in the Caribbean River on the Guyana side. They're not seeing anything GDF. I remember when I was a little child, Burnham had soldiers shooting cannon out in the Atlantic Ocean and GDF people running up and down in your backyard and saying, Venezuelan, it gave you confidence that the GDF would fight and defend the country. Right now, all we're seeing is Barjagler every day talking. You're not seeing any activity from the GDF. You're not getting a briefing from the GDF. We are at crisis. And so, how does the population feel confident that the government and the Ghana Defense Force can defend the country and the population?
You do have a point, Rickford, but my
Yeah.
point was that I'm confident of the GDF's capability given its
Mhm.
resources. On the PR side, more can be done. Uh, and the president wears two caps. One is president, one is commander in chief. And
And Minister of Defense, right?
yeah, the late great Lyndon Forbes Burnham wore those two caps very well. This
Mhm.
president so far is just wearing one cap as IC president, but as commander in chief, he can engage with the GDF, engage with the officers, and be able to show the nation this not only the connectivity, but also imbue a sense of confidence. And as I mentioned earlier, um, the national leaders need to be in Essequibo. Going to Essequibo.
Why do you think that has not happened? Why aren't we seeing a team, maybe jointly, but at least the government ministers one after the other, going to Region 9, Region 7, Region 1, Region 8? Why aren't we seeing that? Are they not
Why
concerned about the defense of the country?
why haven't we
Go ahead,
I'll let
Patty.
why haven't we
I'll let Patrick
seen the entire movement as why haven't we seen, as Gary has outlined and we outlined earlier in this program, an approach to all those countries, all the countries within the Caribbean, to put our position and our argument forward on this issue? Why haven't we seen it in Latin America? There is an African conference here next week, I think Monday and Tuesday. Is there going to be a statement to those representatives of African countries that are going to be here so they too understand our position? Because if this gets to the stage where it's raised in the General Assembly, there's voting, there's discussion, how are we sensitizing everyone to this issue?
Who's
And
going
we're
to
not
vote for
even
us? Are we
and
going to
we're
win
not
the
even
vote?
and we're not even talking about our own people, you know? I remember climbing, doing a hike to Mount Roraima, and I'm talking about a good 20 years ago. And the train stations and the bus stations had big maps, and they had the zone of their reclamation zone on the maps where Essequibo is. So they've been working at this day and night,
Mhm.
generations growing up on it. And unfortunately, our own young people, as you
So
started the program saying, what was this thing really?
Yeah, Venezuela has an ad on TV in Venezuela right now. Every TV station talking about reclaiming Essequibo, how the children of Venezuela deserve
That's right. That's right.
Essequibo,
Yeah. Yeah.
and we're
Look
taking
at
away
the
their
sun rising on
education.
Essequibo.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we don't have one video saying, "Well, Venezuela belongs to the people of that." Not one, nothing.
Thank God for trade winds and not a blade of grass. At least,
And also and social activists and the politicians
Right.
and the
Final comments.
opposition.
Go ahead with final remarks, Gary.
No, I said on social activists and the opposition in flagging this matter to the extent that we had this meeting today. But in closing, I would say that we are at a critical stage now in Guyana where our territorial integrity is under threat, and that's part of our national values. Our national values spring directly from our constitution. A part of the national value, one of them really has to do with Guyana as a nation is indivisible, sovereign, and democratic. That's part of our national values. And
Democratic. Democratic.
springing from that, we have the inviolability of our borders. The government of Guyana is bound to protect that. Any government has to protect that. And the way you protect that is putting your nation's first, your nation's interest first, not your political interests. I would advise the government to put the national interest first and not their political interests so we can bring this country back on track. And if they do that, it'll bring the entire population, put the population in a sense of having confidence in the government and governance, and create a shield and a bulwark against what President Maduro is attempting to do on the 3rd of December. I have no doubt in my mind that because of the indoctrination and the fact that
yeah.
he has agreed to, to put steps in place for free and fair elections in 6 months, that suggests to me that his electoral machinery is corrupt right now. So whatever comes out for that will be what Maduro wants. And Venezuela
Right.
will have to live with that.
Yeah.
So I'm saying that the government has a lot to do on the national level because we need to feel confident. We need to see them in Essequibo. We need to see ministers doing outreach, speaking about this border issue in Essequibo. Punta Playa, which is Point Playa, the most, the southernest,
See, the
the
people.
northernest, yes, and plant the flag. Just plant the flag there. That's a massive thing for the
I'm sure they're
president.
listening to the program, so we can see them in a scribble tomorrow.
That is
Kathy,
submitting to.
while you are, sorry, go ahead.
No, those are my final comments
Yeah.
on the issue.
Kathy,
Thank
while
you very much.
you in your final comments, I want you to address this. I'm seeing on social media an outpouring of outrage by people who believe that this government has so mismanaged not only the border issue, they have been so divisive in the country. It's and they have evaporated any sense of patriotism and nationalistic values by their partisanship, their bitter, nasty attack on political opponents, that the population that doesn't support them, the opposition base, doesn't trust them on this issue, one. And they're saying, no, now that you want our boys and girls to probably go fight on the border, now you're calling in the opposition. In other words, they're being frank. They're saying, okay, the army is black, you guys have been racist, now you're calling in the opposition, you're trying to pull it. It's not going to work like that. How do we bring the country together when the PP government has been so divisive, so nasty? Do we just overlook that? Or are we calling them to apologize for their antagonism and their divisiveness and work on bringing the country together? How do we address this?
Well, the primary, Rickford, we're in a difficult position. We're in a difficult position because this government has acted in a way that no government should ever act, meaning that you deliberately from day one ostracize more than 40% of your population. You ensure that you belliger and you try to destroy, in some cases through physical harassment, running to the courts all the time, unjust legal
On
charges,
just persecution?
persecution and political charges. All of that has been done. When it comes to the institutions of governance, that's supposed to promote transparency and accountability. I remind people of the state boards that always had a representative on it of government and also opposition. This, our in opposition this time, we were deliberately not invited to sit on any of those state boards. The impasse was that in some cases, this government actually selected somebody and said, you can sit and speak for the opposition. You are the opposition representative. You can't get more reprehensible than that. You
And it's
can't,
against the Constitution. It's against the law.
exactly. So it is a blatant disregard of all of this. We have individuals that never got their flood relief. We've had calls for who got flood release money, um who didn't get their pay, who still is holding a pink slip and didn't get their monies. Investigate that. Nothing has been done. In the APNU AFC administration, when we set up this oil and gas industry that we're benefiting from today, that same audit that's revealed the scandal with the 414, sorry, the
200.
240 million US that is supposedly dropped to 3 million US. That company and that audit was instituted by the APNU AFC. And so there's been a blatant disregard for transparency, accountability, and bringing everybody on board. We actually told Exxon, this national resource belongs to all the people of Guyana. And just as how Exxon has to brief the government, we ensured and told Exxon 2015 to 2020, make sure you brief the opposition then, independent of us, the then government. So it's hard after all of that. It's like you kick us, you beat us down, and thankfully you're lucky that we're still gentlemen. And because this country is more important to us, we still gonna engage you on this. Then we have no qualms about that. But we expect the government to do better, because until they start to do better, answer some of people's concerns, really go to the lengths of showing us how you can account for every single Venezuelan, where they are, who is related, how many birth certificates have you given out. Those questions have been asked in Parliament. They've been asked our information officer,
The
who
Information Commissioner.
information commissioner, sorry, I couldn't remember the name, who refuses to answer, gets paid a salary, but does not answer any of those questions. We need to see the government acting differently so that it engenders a spirit of nationalism. Because right now, we are a very divided people. And unfortunately, in every sector, in every day, we see it cuts straight down the lines of race. There's no question. We have
And,
to talk about it.
and Rickford, let me just say quickly to answer the same question, because the question both of us should answer. We have to be above the fray as the opposition, and we have to put Guyana first. If we speak about putting Guyana first at this point in time, we can't not support any and all national efforts to prevent Venezuela from occupying Guyana. We are above the fray as an opposition, and we've demonstrated that before. So while the questions that are being asked there are genuine, and the frustration of the Guyanese people,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, when the government changes and the opposition goes in, we still need to have a country. So you have to ensure that we keep this country safe by every means necessary as the opposition. So that when the government changes, we have this country to manage and manage much better. The alternative government is there in waiting. So we could
But
tell.
Gary, that's easy to say and for us to agree to, and for us to adapt that posture as, let's say, politicians or national leaders. How do you tell the man in the street that? How do you convince the people when the PPP made it a crime basically to be patriotic because they see patriotism as, or they conflated patriotism with being PNC, right? Or back then. And so now I have never seen a patriotic member of the PPP. They have never demonstrated to me that they're patriotic. If they come to power, they start to cost the government, the state. They see it as a burden to them. And so, how does a government like this invoke this that Kathy spoke about, this spirit of nationalism, this spirit of patriotism?
But
It can't fall from the sky. It has to be engendered. It has to be cultivated. So, how does this government demonstrate goodwill to half the population that doesn't support them, and they're beaten down and persecuted and use the police to attack them? Um, you know, how
I
how
think
how how do they
I
start to do this?
I think the question is not how, but when they're going to start. And this is where, regardless of what religion you come from, if you are our faith is strong in all religions once you believe. And here I'm talking about the full gamut of religious groups represented in Guyana. We have to take the higher road. We have to set the example. And it is up to the PPP to find the maturity, the the sense of fairness and honesty, uh, the sense of being humble, the principles that we don't see in them, that is the basis of Hinduism, any one of the religious, the Anglican, any kind of the Christian faiths. We can't do it for them. We will be the bigger person. We will stand strong and united for Guyana and its territories. And it's a burden that they will carry and will be judged on eventually if they don't do the same, if they're not fair, if they're not committed to that one people, one nation, and one destiny. And I think that's a good point for me to stop.
And
Yeah, I would say,
I'll read one of the comments here that says they act like the country belongs to theirs. They act like the country belongs to them, and they act like all the resources and the money belong to them. Let them defend the country. I mean, that's the kind of comments you start to hear.
It's
And
hard.
Gary,
yeah,
you're
I
saying let
hear
us be the
you.
big
I
person, but
understand
how
that.
do you address that? Could you address that comment right there?
Yes, it's as Kathy said, it's a very tough situation we're in the country. But I would say yes, it's an emotional comment that is grounded in the current experiences in Guyana. But I have every confidence in the electorate. I think the people of Guyana recognize what is happening. We have an educated population, and I think they recognize now that the government has been forced to deal with the opposition, not by its own will, has been forced to deal with the opposition, is an indictment on the government itself. And I think that time will come fairly soon when the government will be judged by its actions at the national elections. And leading up to the national elections, people will begin to see things differently. Even the government supporters recognize who can keep and make Guyana more safe, who has got a defense plan, who has got Guyana's interests at heart. Right now and before, it's the opposition who's looking out for Guyana's interests. And the people are recognizing more and more that the government's interest is just for a small portion of people. They are recognizing the government's interest is not for the majority of the people. So I want to
Yeah.
trust the Guyanese electorate to recognize what is happening and in a position when that time comes to express and show their dissatisfaction. And I know we talk about the birth certificates going to Venezuela, but that's another issue because we can talk about that on the electoral reform because that is a flashpoint. That is a flashpoint for a lot of anger. It's a
Mm-hmm.
flashpoint for potential violence at an election. And I
Mm-hmm.
trust that we will sort out these electoral issues before we get there. And every birth certificate, every elector, every documentation must be checked and back checked. And if it is fraudulent, it must be thrown out. So we
Yep.
can have a proper list at the next elections.
Yep.
And
And
maybe I
that's
can
why
stop at this
that's
stage.
actually why we need a new list, because all these rumors and the incidences where it has been proven to be factual in terms of the allocation of birth certificates will only engender even more distrust in the electoral system. Because you're saying the basis on which this list is going to be compiled and I can go and vote is based on, my birth certificate. That's one of the key documents, my passport, etc. And if any of those are questionable and there's so much dissatisfaction and confusion, how am I going to feel that the results of this election can be considered sacrosanct? We in a bad way. We in a
Yeah,
bad way.
and even if they give, you can have a situation where a birth certificate is official but not legitimate. Like, a Venezuelan man come up and say, "Well, my great grandfather I was told was Guyanese, so I want to vote
Yeah,
for the people."
but
You're
you
like,
got
"Eh,
to
get
prove
a birth
it.
certificate." Like, he has a he has a legal birth certificate, but it's not legitimate.
Yeah.
So how do we deal with that? But to be continued. Listen, this program has been so interested. Not a man moved. We have about 15,600 people looking at this program live, and none of them, we're minutes to 12, and nobody is going to sleep. So thank you guys very much. Very
Thank you.
informative program. We'll do it again.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank
And
you.
thanks for the listeners, everybody. Have a good night.
Yeah, good night,
Thanks.
Rick.